I was born on October 31st, 1961, Halloween. And basically what that means is that I have had some historic birthday parties. I remember attending my very first Halloween party dressed as a newborn baby. I was naked, wrapped in a blanket, and wondering why snot, poop, and drool was running out of everywhere. It was a pretty subdued event, and I spent most of the evening in the arms of my mother, a woman whose name nobody remembers. And like most new mothers, she cradled me softly, cooed me, and generally tried to calm me as I lay there. Nurses and doctors came in and out, hustling about, poking and prodding, making sure that we were okay, but pretty much it was just me and Mom that night. And I remember the highlight of that evening, the highlight of my very first Halloween party, came towards the very end of the night. My mother, exhausted from the exertion of childbirth and the excitement of the day, cradled me a little more tightly than she had earlier in the evening. And with a tear rolling down her cheek, she gently kissed me on the forehead and handed me to the delivery room nurse. And that nurse carried me out of the room and put me up for adoption, effectively dropping me into the very first jump of my life. I tell this story to illustrate that while many people will define the word jump as an action verb, an intentional movement, something propelled by the legs, others will talk about the eureka moment, that incredible idea, that business idea, or that leap forward in science, technology, or art. I've come to understand that the notion of jump is something entirely different. And while it's convenient to think, hey, I'm going to make a jump now, I got it all planned, I've got it in my sights, here I go, the reality of it is that more often in life we fall, or we're dropped, or we're pushed, or pulled, or drugged into those important moments in our lives. And instead of taking time, paralyzing ourselves with fear and agonizing over what do I do and how am I going to plan this and what's the right decision, the right jump to make, we might better be served by focusing on the inevitable outcome of the jump, and that's the landing. And if we take a look at our own lives, and we take a look at the people who are closest to us in our lives, we can develop the tools we need to make sure that each and every time, whether we control the jump or not, we can stick the landing. Going back to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, there I was, a newborn child, abandoned, alone, with no control over my situation. But what I couldn't have predicted, what I could not have dreamed of at that moment, was that while I was jumping, so too were Mary and Ken Gailey. Mary and Ken were in their early 40s, and they weren't blessed with the opportunity to have their own children. So as I was jumping, they were deciding and jumping too, to fulfill a lifelong dream of being parents. First with my older sister, and then with me, these two incredibly generous people took two children who were not their own and gave them something that is the only thing a kid can ever ask for, and that's a chance. And so the four of us began the process of sticking the landing together. Early on, it wasn't always easy. I remember being very, very resentful of the fact that my original birth mother didn't want me. I wasn't good enough to be her son. It was very painful for me. And as a young man, I acted out a lot. And one time I remember, I'm not sure exactly what I did, but I remember my mother scolded me and spanked me and sent me to my room without dinner. And I remember stomping up the stairs to my bedroom, furious, and looking back over my shoulder and screaming things at my mother that no woman should have to hear in her life. I hate you. You're not my mother, and you never will be. So I got up into my room, and I was crying unconsolably. When my sister came in, those of you who know my family know that she's always been the smarter one. And she's been a great source of inspiration over my life. But she came into my room, and she said, Pete, what do you think being adopted means? I said, well, I know what it means. It means that I was abandoned, and these people, these imposters downstairs, will never be my parents. And she said, no, it's not what it means at all. What it means is that when your birth mother didn't want you, those two people downstairs did. And there will never be a question that you were wanted. That's a moment in my life I'll never forget. And while at a very young age I didn't really have the capability to fully comprehend what she had said, over the years I've come to understand a good many things about that moment. And one of those things is that they not only gave me a chance, Mary and Ken Gailey gave me something even more important. They gave me the family name, the Gailey family name. And they also gave me the first tool I'd need to always stick the landing. In high school, I was a wrestler. Hard to believe, but true. But generally, I hung out with the most testosterone-riddled, angry people in the whole school. And because wrestlers had a rigorous workout, these guys were monsters, right? When they weren't eating chains for breakfast, they were lifting weights and taking Lord knows what to build up their bodies. So the other thing that they loved to do, and the thing that they lived for, was the opportunity to take their opponent, throw them on the ground, and beat them into submission, and achieve the pin. Because the pin is the ultimate victory in wrestling. Right? And while wrestling is an individual sport, there's also a team score. And if you pin your opponent, you earn 6 points. Okay? Now, if you beat your opponent without pinning your opponent, you can score 3, 4, or 5 points, depending on the margin of victory. But the holy grail is the pin at 6 points. The only other way to score points is by forfeit. If you don't have a wrestler in a weight class, you have to forfeit 6 points to your opponent. So on my first day of wrestling practice, I show up among the goons and really the chiseled football players and all these angry-looking guys. And I look across the room, and to my surprise, there stands my buddy Chuck. And to look at Chuck is to understand immediately that Chuck doesn't have an athletic bone in his body. He's got skinny legs and long, spindly arms, and he had this curly tuft of hair that made him look a little bit like a panicked Q-tip. And so I had a pretty good idea pretty early on that it wasn't going to work out so good for Chuck. And it didn't take long for that thought or that fear to be confirmed, because one by one I watched as everybody on the team threw Chuck on the ground and pinned him. And the next kid threw Chuck on the ground and pinned him. I mean, it didn't help that Chuck was 13 pounds lighter than the lightest weight class in the school. But day after day, he got thrown to the mat and he got pinned. But something kind of funny happened. While everybody else on the team was learning how to throw their opponent, and throw Chuck specifically, Chuck, whether through some stroke of genius or sheer survival, started to focus on his landing. And so Chuck made his main objective the whole idea of not getting pinned. That was his fight. And so every day as he was getting thrown down, he'd work on his bridging. He'd work on his maneuvers to get off his back. He'd show up early for practice and stay late to work on one thing, not getting pinned. So the wrestling season comes around, and we don't have anybody in the lightest weight class. Chuck, even though he's even 13 pounds lighter, became our varsity wrestler because he was all we had. And Chuck would lose gloriously. 27-2, 15-3, he would get clobbered. And any kid in the state could throw Chuck, but not a single kid in the state could pin him. And I'll never forget, somewhere in my junior year, we had just wrestled our main rivals. And we beat them by 1 point. By 1 team point, we had beaten them. And it was a vicious match. There was no love lost between the two schools. But after the match, I decided to go, I talked to my dad, and my dad attended every single sporting event I ever participated in. And I remember saying, Dad, you know, there's got to be something else for you to do. Take Mom to dinner, do something else. You don't have to show up to watch me wrestle every single night. And he said, son, I don't come to watch you wrestle. Okay. I come to watch Chuck. I'm like, Dad, why do you come to watch Chuck? He's the worst guy on the team. He gets killed. He said, you know what? He says, Chuck doesn't have many skills. That's pretty obvious. He says, but he's got one thing that nobody on this team has. Tenacity. That kid never gives up. And as long as he never gives up, he never gets pinned. And if he never gets pinned, he's always better than a forfeit. Wow. It's another one of those moments that you kind of stop and go, I never looked at Chuck the same way again. And I realized later on that Chuck achieved the same goals I was looking for in wrestling. I had that cool varsity jacket, and Chuck wore his everywhere because wrestling was the only way he fit in. He also had developed a little more chiseled body. There was a little more heft from all the workouts. Right? And he also earned the respect of everybody in that gym who understood exactly what was going on when Chuck wrestled. And he gave me the second tool for my toolbox, an understanding of tenacity. My youngest daughter, Hannah, was no Chuck. Hannah was that kid athletically. She got a nickname, Kick Your Butt Barbie, when she was 5 years old playing soccer. Okay? There wasn't a sport she didn't excel at. There wasn't a level at play she couldn't go to. And she always competed against kids 2 and 3 years older than her just so they could match her intensity and her skill. At 9 years old, Hannah developed Legg-Calvé-Perthes disease, which is a degenerative condition of the hip. And for a kid who had made her early identity in life around sports, all of her friends were her friends in sports. All the positive feedback she got was around sports because everybody recognized what kind of athlete she was. For Hannah, developing Perthes was just about the worst thing that could have happened in her young life. That disease pushed her into a wheelchair. She didn't jump, she was pushed. Not only that, she had an angry iron device on the outside, a distraction device on the outside of her hip, and metal bars, rods, drilled into her femur and into her hips. And she stayed in that wheelchair for many months, hoping, perhaps against hope, that somehow miraculously that hip would heal itself. And as she sat in that wheelchair, we saw our incredibly vibrant, wonderful young daughter, confident, fold in on herself. We watched day by day and one by one as her friends moved away. It's more fun to go out and play with the other kids than it is to sit inside playing board games with the kid in the wheelchair. The identity she had built slowly drained, and as Hannah sat in that chair, she got smaller and smaller and smaller, even as she gained weight because she couldn't move. Some of the kids at school started calling her chubby and chunk and resented the fact that she had special privileges, like a special school bus to take her to school and a para in the classroom to help her, and even more, a key to the school elevator so she could get to and from class in her wheelchair. I can't describe to you how painful it is as a parent to watch your child be marginalized, pushed to the outskirts, and to watch them suffer silently. The whole family suffered because Hannah cried herself to bed almost every night. And that affected my wife and I, her older sister, and we lived that terrible time with her. What we couldn't have estimated, though, while Lori and I were trying the best we could to distract her with art, music, science, whatever we could get her into, Hannah had no interest in any of those things. She had a different plan. And when she stepped out of that wheelchair, first onto crutches, and then onto a cane, and then into her first limping steps, she's got a pronounced limp that can't be missed. Her rear end sticks out a little bit and makes it look a little funny when she's wearing a skirt. And for an adolescent girl, there's no greater pain. But as she took those first steps, we didn't realize at first that Hannah had no interest in science or art or music. Hannah's sole focus was to return to the life that she had before she had her hip condition. 2 days out, she asked me to go into the driveway and throw a softball with her. And I got out of that couch so quick you couldn't imagine. And Hannah quickly realized that though her leg didn't work so good, the rest of her body was just fine. And she quickly, with a few mechanical adjustments, learned to throw that softball. And also learned that that hip doesn't matter when she's pitching a softball. And she worked on it, and she practiced, and she tried out for a travel softball team, and luckily found a coach who understands that in children's sports, in team sports, you celebrate the contributions of the individual, not their limitations. Soon enough, Hannah also learned that when she serves a volleyball, that hip doesn't matter, and it darn sure doesn't matter when she's swimming the anchor leg of the 4x100 relay. What we didn't understand is that Hannah had no intention of not returning to the life she once had. Life was not going to take one thing from Hannah that she wouldn't give it. And if you know Hannah, she's not going to give life one damn thing. She's going to take it for herself. That young woman who was reduced to a wheelchair and has come back now is not the athlete that she once was or the athlete she could have been. But she's so much more. And to go out on a field and watch her with her teammates and to see the way they respond to her and the way they adjust their games so that her skills can fit in is inspiring in a way I can't describe to you. And when you can look at a young person in your life and be inspired to the point where you can't speak, you've learned a very incredible lesson And you've learned that the third tool you need in your toolbox is the ability to appreciate inspiration. So with these three tools, here I am, I'm all grown up, I'm still falling, I'm getting pushed, I'm getting dragged, I'm getting bumped. And once again, I got dragged. I got dragged into this magnificent area you call the Northeast. Didn't come here by my choice. My wife got a great job opportunity, and coupled with my complete lack of prospects, I ended up here in the Northeast. And I took a job at the local NBC affiliate. Terrible job, underpaid, underutilized, underrespected. But I met a friend there. He was the morning news anchor at the time, and he and I liked to write screenplays. So we met, became friends, and he agreed to partner with me in my first significant planned jump. I had my three tools now, and I understood that planning the jump, our notion was a little bit misguided, but we jumped anyway because I knew that I could understand how to focus on nailing the landing. So we started a video production company that did everything but weddings. And over the last 20 years, our industry and the world has changed. The world's changed technologically more in the last 20 years than it did in the 50 years previous to that. And we've ridden that wave, and over the course of that time, we've had 4 different names and 4 different business focuses, and every day we have to reevaluate and readjust who we are. But those 3 tools, to this day, remain very, very important to what we're doing. First of all, as owner of my business, my name is on everything we do. Every product we sell, every relationship we develop, every person we hire. And you can be darn sure that if my name's going to be on it, everything we do in our company is going to be done in a fashion that honors those 2 incredible people who gave me the Gailey family name. Secondly, Chuck's taught me that even on my worst days, on the days when I'm hopelessly overmatched and don't have the skills to fight the battles, when everything goes against me, sometimes it's enough to just show up and be the very best I can be on that particular day. And that best day, my best on that day, may not even closely resemble my best ever day. But if I can be the best on that day, and I can gain that 1 inch, score that extra point, that can make all the difference in the lives of the people who pay us to do what we do, the people we employ, and perhaps most importantly, the families who count on me to make payroll every 2 weeks. And finally, Hannah has taught me the value of inspiration. Even on those bad days, when nothing seems to be going right, I can make it happen. I can bend the world to my will if only I can inspire it with an irrefutable reason to do so. And that's very powerful. So what's next? I don't know. I'm no more confident today that I'll control the future than I was back in 1961. I might come up with that eureka idea. I might build that business that climbs to the sky. I might grow old and have some health issues. But no matter what happens moving forward, as much as I control it or don't control it, I do know one thing for certain. I'll stick the landing. And that's what it's all about. I thank you all for your time.